Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the American foreign policy during the 1950s. So, let's get started. Like we mentioned last time, the mid-50s we see a cooling period in the Cold War between us and the Russians. There's a moment where both sides are willing to say, hey, let's live together, let's work together. This was brought on specifically by the death of Stalin and Khrushchev becoming the new Soviet premier. And with that cooling period, the focus will go to the Third World. Now, the Third World is a term that is used to discuss developing nations that were not directly aligned with either the United States or the Soviet Union. And they came about largely because of the collapse of the imperial system that had dominated Western Europe during the 19th and early 20th century. And when we say Third World, here's a map that is generally considered Third World nations. Now, some of these you can see are usually considered Third World. Some of them are more often considered Third World. But this is parts of the world we're going to be looking at, and we're not going to talk about all of this, but we're going to take a big look at some of them, and we're going to start in Latin America. You see, one of the things that happens for and with Latin America is the ability to produce foodstuffs, raw materials. There's some metals there, but during the war, the raw materials here really helped us and helped the United States to weaponize, modernize, and supply to the rest of the world. When World War II came to a close, for a time period, Latin America is just kind of like, okay, well, we don't need you right now, so we'll keep buying some cheap stuff, but that's about it. And then when things don't immediately get great for this part of the world, or because the fact that we aren't buying everything from this part of the world, there are some economic problems that start to show up. And as we have discussed, communism is very likely to happen in places where the economy is not super great. So, under Eisenhower's administration, we see that there's a lot of economic assistance that goes into this region. And in 1954, Guatemala decides to import Soviet weapons. And this is a very clear statement that they are leaning towards the Soviet offers, the Soviet, temptations. Our fear is, great, we don't want to see this. We don't want to see a Soviet-friendly nation in the Americas. So we start arming Honduras, which is a neighboring country of Guatemala. About a month later, the Guatemalan president is overthrown. His government is decimated. And we see that, as you can imagine, the region was not super excited that we had done this, that we had orchestrated what was essentially a coup in a foreign nation. And when Vice President Nixon went through Latin America in '58, the tour, which was supposed to last almost a month, was cut to just a couple of days. Following World War II and the extermination of 6 million European Jews, the claim that Jews needed a land of their own, a homeland, a promised land, a land that had been promised to them since diaspora, had really resonated with the rest of the world. With the mandate system collapsing in the Middle East, the United Nations collectively agreed that the nation of Palestine would be partitioned or cut up to create Israel. And once Israel itself became a nation, the United States was one of the first to recognize Israel as a sovereign nation. And you can see here just how the nation of Palestine has been cut up over the years. And as you can imagine, there has been a lot of tension in this region because of this. And there's been questions about, why the United States is involved in this region and why is that a thing? And then we start arming them, and there are conflicts that happen in this part of the world. It is not an easy fix. And we see that the first real conflict in this region happened very early on, where Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon attack Israel. And, if you're looking at, wow, that is 5 nations to 1, Israel is probably about to be wiped off the map. But again, we had armed Israel extremely well, much better than the other nations in the region. So Israel is able to kind of fend them off and then be a powerhouse in the region. When Egypt nationalizes the Suez Canal, which had been built almost 100 years earlier and had been taken at this time, this was because even though it is in Egypt and had been built by Egyptians, it had been financed by the Brits and the French, and then during the age of imperialism, the Brits kind of took control of it, and then a large part of Egypt as well. So this was the point where Egypt retakes the canal for themselves. There is a brief war for Egypt at this point between England, France, and Israel. All will collectively invade Egypt. The Soviet Union, though, is supporting Egypt. And when they start threatening a larger war, the United States, England, France, and Israel all start backing down. Because this is that saber rattling, that brinkmanship we had been discussing. This was a part of the world that once people are fighting over could lead to a larger confrontation. I liken it to the Balkans in World War I. The Soviets did have some problems, and some of these problems were pretty grandiose. Number one, the Eastern Bloc did not like the fact they had been, conquered in World War II and then continued to be in place. The centralized communist economy in the Soviet Union really didn't allow for individual growth in any way, shape, or form. Yes, the Soviet Union has nuclear weapons, but the satellite nations don't. So communist Russia can always flex on this to the rest of this area. The big surprise that happens is in technology, because for a long time, the West had thought the Soviets were way behind them in tech, in technological development and scientific development. We thought that we were so much farther ahead than they were. And then in 1957, they launched a satellite into orbit, Sputnik 1, and you can see the drawing of it there. And this was terrifying for the West because we couldn't do anything like this. It was another year before we were able to do anything like this. And with the Soviets able to put a satellite in orbit, in geosynchronous orbit, that stayed up there for almost a year, it very clearly made it very apparent that we were behind them. And this is the event that starts the space race, the race to achieve scientific and dominance and technological dominance in a big display for the whole world. And it went Well, the Soviets won the first several rounds. They were the first to put a satellite in space, as we said. They were the first to put a living animal into space, Laika, a dog. They were the first to put a man into space. They were the first to put a team of people into space, the first woman into space. But we put the first person on the moon. And with that, the space race largely was over. It was considered a technological development the likes that hadn't been met and could be viewed by the whole world. There would be Soviet and American cooperation in space exploration as well as scientific endeavor, but we see that the era of peaceful coexistence starts to come to a conclusion in 1960. You see, there was this plane that had been built called the U-2. This was an extremely high altitude spy plane, and it was so high altitude that we were convinced, number one, the Soviets couldn't even see the thing with any radar. They certainly couldn't shoot the thing down. They didn't have anything that could fly high enough, fly fast enough. So this spy plane flies across the Soviet Union taking pictures for, well, a couple of years before the Soviets, shoot it down. The thing is, and we didn't know this until much later, the Soviets knew we were doing this from day one. From the very first flight, their radars could pick it up, but they didn't have anything to intercept it. And for the next couple of years, they would work to try to get a weapon system, a weapon platform that could bring down this very high altitude, very fast flying plane. And when that happened, it was, as you can imagine, extremely humiliating, because when the plane went down, the first thing that the Defense Department thought was, well, that's bad, but with a little bit of luck, we can say it was just a guy who flew the plane on his own. He was a rogue pilot, and oh my goodness, we had no idea that he was going to do this. Besides, there's no way that a guy could crash a plane flying at the edge of the stratosphere and live. And that was our first press release, was, yeah, this guy he was on his own. He was a, rogue pilot, loose cannon, all those words. But the pilot survived. And, he comes on national TV to say, no, or Soviet TV, because he was captured by the Soviets. He said, yeah, this is who I am. I was not a rogue agent. I'm licensed by the, it was bad. It was really bad. A lot of credibility lost after this. Khrushchev walked out of the some peace summits talks, and the Russians decided to test their newest atmospheric bomb, a clear breach of a treaty that we had signed earlier. But, we had breached this treaty anyways, so, we're both kind of, not good. The last big kind of transformation that we see in this region, in this time, is when Cuba has their revolution in '59. The Cuban Revolution of '59 was pretty much the eventual thing that was going to happen because of Cuba's independence. 1898, Spanish-American War takes place. A powerful series of individuals become dictators of Cuba who make money for themselves, who make money selling tobacco and sugar super cheap, super high quality to the States, to the West. And this leads to some economic disparity in the region. Enter Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and they lead a revolution against this government, against the oppressive regime, the same kinds of things that had happened 7 decades earlier. immediately what happens is Castro says to the United States that all of the crops are now nationalized, and this is just it. So, United States, you've enjoyed this stuff too much, too long, so we're taking it back. We put an embargo on it, thinking, well, we'll just see how you like that. Who's going to buy sugar and tobacco? Well, lo and behold, everybody likes sugar and tobacco. Both products are highly addictive. And when the Cubans turn around on us, the Soviet Union is definitely right there to say, hey, how would you like us to buy this stuff dirt cheap and, go team communism? And this leads to Cuba becoming a communist state. And yikes. This isn't a country in Eastern Europe that had fallen to communism or the southern part of Latin America. Cuba is 90 miles off the coast of Florida. This is going to be problematic. But that is a story for another day. So today we took a look at American foreign policy decisions in the 1950s. Hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.